Okay.
That's green.
Green.
So that it turns green. Yeah.
Ah,
Yours too, sir. Yours as well, Commissioner.
Dale, we know who he is. Okay.
Commissioner Goodell, we need to discuss this.
Is that so it gets picked up on the mic? Yeah. Good afternoon. Dale Helvig, Park Santiago Neighborhood Association. Understand you guys are going to be discussing some things that are kind of relevant to our neighborhood as well. I did want to provide you a photograph, or at least a copy of a photograph that was taken back in 1929. It has a row of palm trees on Edgewood Road. And I'm concerned about that, and I think what you guys are going to do is going to be talking about similar instances in Santa Ana, but this is one that's directly near and dear to my heart because there's a development project that's potentially going to remove 2 or 3 of these trees that were planted well before 1929 based upon their height. So to see these trees removed for a contemporary modern building going in seems like it's wrong, especially seeing as how over on at the yard, Santa Ana Yard, we have a sign up there that says Santa Ana's Tree City USA. So I don't see how we can be Tree City USA if we remove trees like this in historical sensitive neighborhoods. Thanks.
Thank you.
Chair Christie, may I ask a question of the resident?
Yes.
Yeah, Dale. Since I believe ETAC handles trees for the city, is that right?
Yes.
Have you brought that issue up to
Yes, I
that
have.
commission?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
But I saw that it was on the agenda for you guys to discuss it too, so I thought I'd bring it to your attention as well.
Great, thank you.
For short one.
I'm sorry, did you say the date of the photo was 1929?
1929.
The photo is 1929.
Thank you.
Dale, do you have a copy for us as well?
Yeah, I have 9, but somehow the printer only printed out 8. So I can get more.
Just email it to us so we have.
Oh, here's one more. So.
Thank you, sir.
Those trees have grown a lot in the years.
Welcome, Attorney Lisa. How are you?
Hello.
Good.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Okay. Is there anyone else on non-agendized item? Okay, then we're going to move right along to our work study session. Note that no action will be taken on this item, okay? Number 1, this work study is a continuation from the work study session that was held on October 3rd. Now, since we don't remember which room to be, I requested Executive Director Ty to review what we did last time so that we can move forward, okay, on that. So now, where are we? We will be discussing historic-related issues pertaining to historically sensitive neighborhoods, protection of historic structures, and preservation of trees. Okay, staff will now do the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairperson Christie and members of the Commission. This is a part 2 and continuation of the workshop that began on October 3rd. Tonight we have a presentation for you that will be presented by our staff, Pedro Gomez. We will, as the chairperson indicated, go over what we heard the last time, so that gives you a chance to at least see what was discussed the last time. And that will be a brief review, and then we will go into the item 3, 4, and 5, which are historically sensitive neighborhoods, historic resources protection enforcement, as well as preservation of historic trees. We will also provide with some supplemental information that we have received so far, just to give some background and response back to some of the questions. Not every question we're going to have respond to, so we just want to provide what we have so far. Our goal tonight, hopefully, is to be able, at the end of the night, be able to get direction from the Commission so that we then can compile and formulate into a memo. Our goal then is to get that memo back to the Commission so that you can say, yay, this is what we said, or nay, this is not what we said. and we can refine it. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Pedro Gomez to start with the presentation.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. As Director Tai mentioned, this is a continuation of a work study from the October 3rd HRC meeting, where we did intend to discuss these 5 items listed above. Unfortunately, due to time, we only got around to commission powers and duties and historic application fees. So the intention today is to go over the next items. But first, we wanted to summarize kind of the major key points that were discussed regarding the first 2 items. The first one was commission powers and duties. As part of the discussions that the commission had and recommendations were ideas regarding the ability to require historic plaques as part of properties that are designated on the historic list. Establishing a procedure for placing items on the agenda, or at least kind of re-looking at that procedure. What the purview of the commission is regarding alterations and demolition of resources that may be designated, and then the commission also highlighted structures that are not necessarily designated but are what they thought was within the purview of the commission. Commissioners representative to the Planning Commission. So similar to what the HRC has now, where we have a representative from the Planning Commission, the Commission discussed the potential for having a HRC commissioner go to the Planning Commission and talk about historic sensitive issues.
I have a question on that one, okay? All of the commissions, because I was thinking that when I left, are all uneven. There's never an even number on a commission, I guess, because of the fact it could be deadlocked. Would that interfere with us, with a commissioner represented on the Planning Commission, since that would make it an even number now instead of an odd number on that commission?
You have 9 members. The question there, if I understood it right, was to have members of this commission, not necessarily the commissioners, but members of this commission also be a part of the Planning Commission. I thought that was the discussion.
Yeah, but
One.
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 No, she's saying then that would make it 8.
That would make it 8, even. I got it.
Okay,
So
make
we
it.
probably need to be 2 then. Or the member is not a non-voting members.
That could be as well.
That could be done as well.
Their information and
Because
their
that
thoughts.
hit me as I
Yeah.
was driving
Yeah.
out of the parking lot, but to have a voice, but not.
Not a voting member?
Or something, because I wanted to say with that, before we go any further,
Sure.
would that
Yeah.
prohibit us without taking up the time to go through
Right.
and then have it come back, say, nope, Is that, I think Chair, was it Chair Parker? No, Chair, Vice Chair.
I just have a comment about the non-voting. I think it'd be, which would be fine for most of their agenda. But when there is something that is historically sensitive, then maybe that's when that person gets a vote at that time.
That still gives
I mean,
you an even vote. You need,
Yeah.
the commission needs a tie, basically have to be an odd. So either, what are the options?
If there's a tie, doesn't the, because you could have a tie even on
Right.
on
If
even-
it-
Right, you can.
somebody
Right.
abstains or
But the
whatever.
idea-
So doesn't the chairperson, or don't they,
The Planning
break
Commission
that?
bylaws have a clause in their bylaws about impasses.
okay.
So there is something that would address if there's
Yeah.
a tie.
Yeah.
I think that did happen at a recent.
It did,
planning
Yes, it
commission.
it did.
Yeah.
But
Doesn't happen a
the
lot.
goal is not to create a situation that we could have a tie just by the makeup, right?
Sometimes, depending on agendas, ties are preferred. But those agendas are
Touche.
never stated.
Well said. Point taken.
Yeah, we don't want to be a hindrance, on
Right.
that, that would complicate, the commission on that. And so that's why I'm bringing this up, because we want to be a plus, not
Right.
a complication,
So, part of it is that you have a member of the planning commission here with you.
We understand that.
And I believe the goal of that was to really get that commissioner be acclimated and be familiarized with historical issues, so that when that commissioner, in his function as a planning commission, sees something, say something. I don't want to sound like a cliche, but see something, say something. And then that would then cause that conversation to occur there. So that was the whole idea as well. I think, I wasn't here for that, but in just seeing the makeup, I think that was the intent. Was just not to provide input here, but also to make sure that the historical issue is
is very much a part of the planning commission process. So you have it already. It may not be in the form that you're talking about, but you have it already.
The only, concern I have, we have a new appointee, no problem, okay? We have a new appointee to our commission every year. So they're trying to catch up.
Okay?
And by the time they get something, a little bit of knowledge, they don't have the vast knowledge that we have in order for an issue that they may not be, feel comfortable bringing up something at that time because of the fact they're constantly changing. Do you understand? Does that make sense? And that's why we're saying that we do need somebody there that is fully versed in what we are designating for.
I think I understand what you mean by, it's constantly changing, but I think that's also a plus because you have all the planning commissioners have served some time in here, so they're all getting bits and pieces at different times. So you almost have every single commissioner kind of has been through the HRC, so they kind of have that understanding. So, I feel like it's my job when I'm on the planning commission to voice any type of historic things. And yes, I am new to it, but I'm not the only one that's voicing most of the time. I'm getting other people starting to say things and kind of starting that conversation, and then we're all jumping on. So I think it's a plus that we're constantly changing. But yeah, I agree. I think
we
that
welcome you here.
Yeah, exactly.
We really do welcome you here. But once again, as far as what you were saying, the idea was that to have the commissioners come in, but we really do need someone else. Someone from this commission to the planning commission. That's.
Well, we could do it the way that Min said, that the HRC member that's on PC only votes on those matters that involve something historic. That's what we have on CRHC. They should have a senior tenant member, and they only vote on things that have to do with assisted housing. So we could do something like that.
That makes sense. That makes sense on a
Well, you're not a full voting member of the planning commission.
Right.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure that, our properties that are coming up for development have the full extent of the historic perspective of that particular project and input on that project. It's not that we want to, stop projects coming in, but we want to make sure that our historic significance is being preserved at the same time.
Understood.
Yes. So, okay. All right, go on.
Chair,
Yeah.
Christie, I have a comment. Where it says purview of commission regarding non-historic structures, I was wondering if we might consider wording that a little bit differently, like purview of the commission regarding structures not currently designated as historic? Because you say non-historic, you're just saying, well,
That non-historic could be a brand-new McDonald's, is what you're saying, which we don't care about that. But
right.
you're,
So
I think
purview of the commission regarding
Historic,
or structures not currently designated as historic.
would you say
potentially historic structures.
Historic significance?
Potentially historic structures.
So I think that came from Commissioner Rush, was kind of viewing that, and I, when it came to my turn to make a comment, I said that to make it easier, some cities just say, hey, if a building is 75 years old, it goes in front of the Historic Commission, period. That makes it easier that you don't have to go, well, is that kind of is that kind of a historic structure or not? Should that go in front of the commission? It's just, hey, is this 75 years old? Then it does, or 60, or whatever we designate.
I appreciate
was the way I
that.
did
I think the way I worded it, what you say would fall underneath rewording of that
Yeah.
along the way, along the way it's stated.
So you want to give it a time,
Time,
75 years. So we worded that any structure over to 75 years.
Yeah, what we can do is when we bring the memo back to the commission,
Yeah.
we'll make sure that that wording is consistent with what Commissioner Tardif recommended, and it's exactly what the commission would like to forward to the council.
Yeah, you're going to see this again.
Yeah, you'll see it again.
Yeah.
So I do have a question. If we're saying 75 years, but I know to be on the historic registry, things have to be a minimum of 50, should that not be consistent?
Consistent,
I,
50 years or older.
I think what can happen is, our chapter 30 does say the 50. If we change the language to not currently designated, I think that captures what the intention of the commission would be, that structures that could be, you'd want to
Potentially.
extend the purview to maybe take a look at those. So that should be fine, the language.
Yeah, keep it at 50, right?
we'll keep it consistent.
Consistent.
Very good.
We don't want to make waves. We don't want to make things complicated, okay?
The last item was the discussion about the potential to have 6 meetings per calendar year, and this really came up regarding, I guess it was in tandem with the conversation about placing items on the agenda and how far in between they are for 4 meetings, and then if there was an urgency to talk about another item, 6 would bring it a little bit more kind of consistently in spacings. The Commission did talk about, we currently have in process the agenda, the ability to do a special agenda, so that's also an option that we currently have. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the 6 meetings, but if something were to come up, we'd have a special agenda as a tool. So,
Or if we, like we did 2017? Yeah, 2017, when we had so many properties going on the
100
historic.
applications.
We had a meeting just about every other
Right.
week,
So
you know,
you're able to
so it was just
schedule special meetings.
Special meetings.
Pedro,
so-
what does the current bylaw say, and when was that bylaw put into place on the number of meetings? Is it 4 meetings per year?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
It's 4 meetings per year. I don't think that was modified as part of the last
That was
bylaws.
back-
Yeah,
way back.
that was
Way back,
originally.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
the bylaw has always been 4 meetings per year.
If I remember
quarterly, and
correctly,
then-
yeah.
It's, well, when I first came on the commission, they met every month. So the bylaws were changed
Maybe
at
at
some
some
point.
Yeah.
It wasn't always
Changed in
4
16.
times a year.
They were-
So in 16, they were modified to become every month?
No,
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 prior
16,
to that.
16.
Okay,
Sometime before 2016, it was also 4 times a year.
okay.
Do we have a copy of the board? I requested Sarah to print
Yeah,
out.
she emailed it today.
She emailed it.
Yeah.
Oh, it was email?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Right. I just want to make sure that just want to make sure, commissioners, that you have and everything, okay.
So, but if the goal is to change it to 6 or keep it at 4, because changing to 6, then you would change the bylaw. Keep it at 4, you can always schedule a special meeting, and it doesn't have to be called, does it have to be called at the previous meeting, or can it be called in
No.
between?
It could be called. in
So
between.
as long as
It's
you
an
have
issue came up or
4
something.
commissioners
Agree.
agreeing to call for a special meeting, you can call for a special meeting.
Okay.
So that way, it allows you the flexibility of not necessarily just changing the bylaw today, but the process of putting on a special meeting is that if 4 commissioners come together and said, we want to call a special meeting, staff, get us a date between here and here, we can do that.
Is that agreeable, everyone?
Is that something that you would want to be agreed to and then just not make this an issue, or?
So I think the concern was from Commissioner Rush, I'll speak for him since he's not here, as best I can, but I think he was concerned if we had something that we wanted to put on the agenda, and then our next meeting wasn't for 3 more months, that there could be things that are time sensitive. So how would we handle that under the special meeting?
So I guess if an issue arose that someone wanted to have something put on a special agenda, like you found out there's going to be a demolition of,
Right.
you know.
Of the How Waffle
Yes.
House or
So then
Yeah.
you could call your chair, the chair could contact Sarah or Min and say, I'm concerned about this, it's happening, and we're not going to have another meeting for 2 months. And so then Sarah could poll all of you and see who's available and who wants the meeting. 5 of you is a majority, because there's 9 of you. So 5 would have to say, yes, we need to have a meeting, and then we would agendize the special meeting.
Is that agreeable with everyone of the process?
I think it seems to work so far, you
Yeah.
know.
Okay.
Because I get a lot of emails, and then I forward it to Executive Director Men, and then he responds back, okay, anyway, but that's the way it's, we want to make it as easy
Right.
upon us and staff at the same time.
Sure.
You know, the simpler the process, the more we're able to accomplish, right? We have enough of complications
Okay.
in the life,
We,
right?
we can move forward. We got enough to
Yeah.
put as a, what the discussion is, and then at the end of the memo process, you can say, we agree with this or not.
Yeah, I
Okay.
would say, part of my logic for supporting the 6 meetings a year is if the fees are reduced, you're going to see another swell of homes come in, that people that are waiting with bated breath at the moment to see what's happening.
Yeah. We always have the flexibility of increasing the number, which we did, from what
Yeah.
I've heard.
Yeah,
We did
we
because
did
of the amount of application that we had, so.
Question
Yes, sir.
on this. Are the recommendations we're making here, would they be recommendations to a change to the municipal code, or?
That depends.
might have to be.
Some of them have to be changed to the charter, and some may not, depending on what the issues are.
To the code or to the bylaws.
Right, okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, moving right along.
So regarding the historic application fees, the commission had the following conversation key points, and I kept them pretty brief because conversation did carry on for a little bit longer. But some of what was talked about was the consideration for having 2 different sets of fees, historic fees that may be less for historic listing than versus Mills Act. The commission brought up the fact that the Mills Act has the property tax incentives versus when you do just the listing, you are subject to the standards and special considerations, but you're not necessarily getting a benefit. Some of what the fee numbers thrown out were maybe about in the range between $200 to $500 for the historic listing application. The commission felt that was fair, and about maybe $2,000 for the Mills Act application. What was also introduced was the concept of a sliding scale for the historic applications. That was probably something that needs to be fleshed out, but an example would be maybe based on geographic. And then later on in this presentation, we'll provide you a map of where the current listings are geographically in the city. So before we carry on to the next 3 items, I did want to just quickly go over some of this information that was shown at the last work study. Again, this shows a timeline of the fees during the last 5 years. It shows the reduction of the fee, the extension of the reduction, including the waiver, and then back again in 2017 when the extension and the waiver were not continued. And so the current fees now for the 2019 and 2020 fiscal year is $3,500 approximately for each application. This is a little bit hard to see, but what this does is shows you kind of from 2007 to 2019, the number of applications we received from the Mills Act and the historic listing, and then the fees each fiscal year. So this is better represented here in this graphic. The bar chart here would be showing the Mills Act fees during each fiscal year and how much they would be. And then the line chart would be representing the number of applications we got for the Mills Act. So this bar here is specifically for the Mills Act. So you can see there's a correlation between, and this is obvious, between the application fees and the number of applications we received during the fiscal year. And this is the same representation, but this is for the historic listings. Again, we have similar kind of correlation where you have fees up to maybe $4,000, $5,000, and applications go down. The waiver was in place, and then we have more applications. And then at the last work study, there was a conversation, I believe, about Mills Act and just kind of what the breakdown is for when these properties are assessed. So just quickly, I wanted just to go over the Mills Act breakdown. So Mills Act was introduced in 1972 by Senator James Mills, and it's an agreement that binds the owner to maintain the property under the guidelines of the Office of Historic Preservation, Department of Parks and Recreation, the U.S. Secretary of Interior Standards, and the State Historical Building Code. In exchange, the property owner may benefit from property tax incentives or reductions. So under this, 3 property values are determined. There's what's called the base year, or what's the purchase price under the Prop 13, fair market value, and then the historical property value, which the assessor does a calculation based on rental income. So the historical property value is based on the property's ability to produce income. For owner-occupied property, income is based on the potential rental value. So the assessor will base the property taxes on the lowest of these 3 values. This generally results in a significant property tax reduction unless the property already benefits from low property taxes under Prop 13. So folks who would benefit from this are maybe folks who bought their property within the last 10 years. So what we also wanted to do was provide 2 examples of current Mills Act tax savings, and these are real-life examples of Mills Act agreements that were approved in 2018 by our council. The commission recommended approval for those. They include 1815 North Heliotrope and 2203 North Flower Street. Both of these properties are in Floral Park. So 1815 North Heliotrope is about 3,600 square feet in size. It's an modern architecture style, and includes a detached garage on a 10,500 square foot lot. As you can see, the property tax that was assessed in 2018 before the Mills Act was $15,000 approximately. Now, the city gets 19 cents for every property tax dollar. So pre-Mills Act, the city was receiving $2,600 approximately. Once the property was reassessed as a Mills Act property, the property was taxed and computed at $4,400. So that's a difference of about $10,600. So in property tax savings for the first year. Now, this doesn't stay the same throughout the next 10 years. It actually does go down. So the city will now receive, at this point, $852, which is a difference of $2,000. So the city does get a reduction in what we're taking in terms of property tax. So for the example of 2203 North Flower, which also, like I said, is located in Floral Park, the structure is about 1,600 square feet in size. It's a minimal traditional architectural style, also with a detached garage on a 9,000 square foot lot. The property tax in 2018, pre-Mills Act, was about $7,800, while in 2019, after the Mills Act, it was $2,765. So it's about a $5,000 tax difference, and then the difference between what the city gets is $961. So these homeowners are getting significant tax reductions, and so the idea is so then they can put that money back into the rehabilitation of the structure. So that's the intention of the program, and what we've seen is that we've seen homeowners invest that money into foundation repairs with roofs. So they're putting it into work. So. Now to move on to the actual items that were part of the work study. The third item up for discussion was regarding historically sensitive neighborhoods and the concern for demolition or alterations of structures that have not been designated or surveyed, but are located within the areas that are over 50 years old. The first mention of the term historically sensitive neighborhood was by this commission in 2002. And just like the current commission, the commission back then identified limitations in preservation efforts and a need to identify core neighborhoods for example, cultural tourism. So the commission subsequently identified an intent to create historically sensitive areas or boundaries and started identifying critical neighborhoods such as Washington Square, Wilshire Square, Floral Park, East Side. At the time, windshield surveys were conducted for neighborhoods of East Side and Wilshire. And extensive photographs were taken for additional neighborhoods. Additionally, the commission had the intention of developing boundaries and guidelines and standards for these sensitive areas. Unfortunately, the process of reviewing projects within these areas has largely been informal in nature to date, as none of these areas have been formally designated as historic districts, either at the local, state, or federal level. Nor has a policy been adopted by the City Council to officially recognize them as historically sensitive areas. So there's a kind of a disconnect between staff and the areas that the council, or the commission has identified as areas that they want to maybe protect. So as listed in the workshop that was provided by the planning secretary, there are currently two ways to move forward if the commission would like to protect these areas in whole. That includes local designation through the city, or state and federal designation like Floral Park is doing. To move forward with local designation opportunities, our city council would have to establish and approve a separate fee. There's currently no separate fee for an application for historic district designation evaluation. And it most likely would include establishing procedures for the application, which maybe could include creating a context statement of the neighborhood, and maybe a comprehensive survey identifying contributing, non-contributing structures and buildings in the area. The request for local state designation or federal designation happens in cities throughout California, usually through grassroots efforts. And so the community gets together as a whole, as Floral Park did, and have a comprehensive idea that they want to designate and protect their neighborhood. So they go through their own resources to apply to the state or the federal level, and then at that point the state works with the city to kind of define a boundary area, but that's at the state and federal. So today staff continues to find opportunities to expand on our preservation efforts. For example, we're always looking for grant opportunities that are afforded to us specifically because we're certified local governments. Additionally, our general plan update is looking to incorporate a historic preservation element, something that we have never had before. Lastly, we just found out last week that Governor Newsom signed AB 451, I believe, which is a state historic rehabilitation tax credit. We're now part of 35 other states that have that. Before we were only able to apply for federal tax credits. So now as a state tax credit, we have now the opportunity, or homeowners, property owners have the opportunity to apply for these tax credits and rehab their structures and continue preservation efforts. So these are things that we've looked at and we continuously are looking at to help preserve structures and areas. Unfortunately, with the limitations that we have, that we don't have too many districts. What I wanted to show, and I think at this level it might be a little bit hard to see, but we do have the PowerPoint printouts for each one of the commissioners. This is the printout that we have at the website. It's currently not an interactive map, but we would like to work with our GIS team to kind of have those capabilities in the future, where maybe a homeowner would like to take a look at the current listings that we have now, click over one of the designations, and it would provide information regarding the property, what it's designated, when it was designated, and perhaps maybe it was a Mills Act home or not. And so you can see that there's a concentration of historic properties north of 17th Street. And there's some pockets here and there south of the city. But when the city reduced the fees and waived some of the fees, like the commission mentioned, we did receive a lot of applications that were outside of the Flora Park area, outside of the Park Santiago area. So we did see kind of an interest from more city members throughout the city to designate their properties. So at this point, similar to the last work study, we wanted to leave it up to commission discussion to see what they wanted to maybe rework as part of the historically sensitive conversation, or maybe direct staff to draft the memo in a way that asks the council to establish a fee, or maybe look at the application procedures for local designation. So we'll leave it up to the commission to have some of that conversation at this point.
Very good. Commissioners?
Quick question. Can you go back one slide, please?
Sure.
So, for example, the French Park, who paid for that to make that a historic district?
So, from what I understand, those efforts were undertaken by Diane Marsh, and that was also at a community level. And I don't know if she went straight to the state, but she definitely went to federal level. And I believe that the designation here, or at least the recognition at the city level, was done after the fact. I might be incorrect in the timing, but currently it's a federally recognized district. But zoning-wise, for us, we have what's called a SD, special district, that was it was applied and it was implemented, and so it developed its own set of standards to preserve that neighborhood. So in a way, it does what a historic district would do and help preserve it, but it's not a local district. It's a federal district, and we have zoning. It's a zoning thing here for us in terms of preservation. So.
But did the city pay for it, or was that more of that neighborhood paying for it?
I don't know the history of how the SD was implemented, so I mean, I imagine that the efforts were undertaken by staff.
Neither. Diane Marsh did it. Diane
All of
Marsh
it?
did it for free.
There you go.
Okay.
She did it for free.
Yeah.
Okay, commissioners?
By the way,
Oh.
excuse me, not for free. She wanted to get a coffee table book out of it, and so she published a book that was a coffee table book for it. That's how she covered the cost.
The reason I was asking is to see if there's like a precedent set that the city paid to have a neighborhood put on the historic district. That's why I asked.
Just real quick formality, I want to acknowledge that Commissioner Nguyen has joined us for the meeting.
Welcome. I didn't see you.
It's not good.
Sorry.
I went to the wrong room first, and then I realized my email was over here.
You know, good. Okay. Commission, back to you. Commissioner Schaefer.
Yeah, so I've brought this up over the years many times, and the concern I have often is when I see in Park Santiago or Floral Park or West Floral Park or Washington Square, somebody tearing down a house, remodeling, putting in something that is horrible, that does not go with the character of the neighborhood. For example, a house was just done recently, a couple years ago, on Flower Street. It must be like 1701 or something, the address. It sides to an alley, and it looks like it fell out of Mission Viejo, It's got arched windows that were very popular in the 80s and 90s. I mean, the floor plan is nothing remotely appropriate for where it's been built. There's a garage on the front. It's the only house on Flower Street until you get north of Memory Lane that has a garage on the front, and it's got a 3-car garage. I mean, it just is a horrible, horrible architectural example, and that was done in the recent history of our city staff. So my concern has always been, somebody comes up to the counter and they say, I want to build this house, and who's ever at the counter just like goes along with it and goes, okay, sure, that looks nice. When we have neighborhoods that we all know what they are in the room, I can give you the list of them again, but when things come in those neighborhoods to the counter, there needs to be an extra layer of sensitivity. There's bad remodels and additions in Floral Park and Park Santiago and Jack Fisher Park. I mean, they're all over, and I'm sure, and those are just the neighborhoods that I'm in all the time. I'm sure the rest of the city also has terrible remodels. Now, I have a master's in architecture. I love modern architecture, so I'm not speaking against that, but there's a thing called context, and you want to have you want to take what's around you and elevate it, not bring it down. There's on Heliotrope Street in Floral Park, there's a new build in the cul-de-sac that blends in and you'd never know it wasn't original. And a half a block up, there are 2 homes across from each other that look terrible. They're like 1985 Newport Beach, wannabe Liberace, and they don't go with the fabric of the neighborhood. And there's a new build right now on that street as well, and I'm a bit nervous to see what that's going to look like when it's finished, because it doesn't look great at the moment. So I think there needs to be, my concern with this is we need to have a way of really scrutinizing projects that people want to do when they're in a neighborhood. In West Floral Park, there are all these beautiful Roy Russell homes with board and batten siding and wood windows or steel windows, and one by one people are ripping off the siding, stuccoing over, putting in cheap windows. I mean, they're just destroying the fabric of the neighborhood, and once it's gone, it's gone. So I know the city has pushed back the staff and said, well, that's not a designated district. Well, BS, let's do it this afternoon. Let's say, okay, Jack Fisher Park and West Floral and all these neighborhoods that are around town, Wilshire Square, Washington Square, that those are historically sensitive neighborhoods, instead of burying our head in the sand and pretending that they're not. That's so whatever we have to do to get to that point, I'm in favor of that.
And I have a comment, if I may.
Commissioner Hart?
My reading of the municipal code regarding the Historic Resources Commission, I believe that the Historic Resources Commission through the code, has the authority to designate local historic districts. It's right there in the code. That is, we can designate local historic districts. We can designate a building regardless without even contacting the owner and designate it as historic. That's the way the municipal code reads. Now you can, I'm sure I'll get your opinion on that, but I believe this commission has the authority to designate structures and even districts as historic on our own.
Okay, we need to investigate that, as far as, as it is. And if it is there a way for us, we already know, put together a map or a process in way of saying these are our recommendation is that we have identified these areas as historically sensitive areas, not district, but areas in their city, and that it will show that when a person comes in to our planning department, automatically this will trigger up, okay? Because apparently it's not doing it now because of the fact that we have not pointed out that Washington Square, historically sensitive area, Wilshire Square, historically sensitive, you know? We didn't say it's designated or anything, but we are saying that it's sensitive. East side, okay? You know, all the other areas that Henninger Park, historic, sensitive area, to let them, you know, people know, or, you know, our employees know at the planning calendar, wait a minute, we need to take a special look at whatever this project is coming across our calendar for. I think we have, going with Commissioner Tara, as far as we have the authority, I believe that would fit in with the parameters of whatever code you're listed in, or, you know, you can probably give that section to our attorneys here. And maybe that's how we can,
I have it.
you know, can come in and fit that in. But you're not saying it's designated, it's just sensitive to that, to bring it to attention.
So you would have to have some kind of criteria that you would establish
Okay.
to come up with what these historically sensitive.
There's
areas-
actually a criteria in the municipal code. It's fairly detailed. And it's not really, there's not a lot of expense involved. If you can justify it to the historical commission that this building is of historical significance, then, and if you convince the commission of that, then we could designate it as such. Now, of course, the city council could always overturn this. That's the other caveat too.
But you're not designating a building, you're designating an area. So
Oh yeah, I'm talking about buildings too. That's in the code.
Well, yeah, it would probably be in that particular area too, you know.
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
Yeah, on the area. But the most important thing, I think, is the priority of what we are, is to, you know, we just have to preserve that people are not coming in and gutting our historically, our historic city. I mean, you know,
So-
it's our city that we're, you know, the foundation on which Orange County started. And we need to take special caution or oversight as to preserving that history and that fabric.
So just to summarize, what I heard was that what you want to communicate is that we need to look at a heightened level of review of structures and potential resources when they're being modified in areas that you would want to consider historically sensitive. You want to bring attention to a more detailed review. You want to bring attention to whether, let's say, if it's a remodel, that the remodel also get reviewed for context-sensitive changes, architectural-sensitive changes and features, so that not just anything gets approved, but established design criteria that says if you're in a historical sensitive neighborhood, you want to remodel, you have to consider that the changes are sensitive to the existing material, historical nature, or the design, the context of the neighborhood, those type of things. You don't necessarily require that they would go through a historical review process, but that it needs to be a heightened level of consideration. And you would create criteria for how to basically help the staff be able to have, number one, the authority, but also the ability to make the judgment of what would be appropriate, but still, it's not just go ahead and do anything that you want to provide. And this would only be in what you would consider historically sensitive neighborhood.
And we already have a list of those.
Okay. So that summarized that. I do have a recommendation. We are in the process of updating the general plan. One of the new element that we're putting in is a historical cultural element. As you know, we have over 60 neighborhood association that are formally created, and they all have relatively a defined border area. One of the discussion I've had with my staff is that regardless of whether it's considered historical sensitive neighborhood, but as a branding, as an ability to identify those neighborhoods, that we do that through the general plan, so that there's identified neighborhoods that are already there now, and it's recognized through the general plan. And that's going to help future branding purpose, future identification purpose, and it recognizes the importance of those neighborhood association in our government structure. To go beyond that, we potentially could look at coming up with criteria for helping to determine historically sensitive neighborhood, and if those neighborhoods meet these type of criteria, then they would be further classified as historically sensitive neighborhood. Or through the general plan process, we can provide a narrative for sensitively, or the neighborhoods that you want to identify as historically sensitive. And through that, then the implementation that would be is to come up with guidelines on how to address modifications, new construction for the historically sensitive neighborhood. Obviously, you're not saying citywide. You just want to look at just certain areas of the city.
Correct. Yeah.
Does that sum it up?
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm not against people improving or adding onto or remodeling their property. I just want to make sure that what they do,
Right.
we have to live with these properties for the next 50 to 100 years.
So what you would like to see is, for those property that does not come through this commission, that there's some design guidelines, criteria that you have a level of comfort, say, that's if you follow these guidelines, you don't hit the mark 100%, but you'll hit it 90%, you'll hit it 70%, and we're good with that.
So about 15 years ago, this commission did work with the city staff, and we came up with design guidelines to be used citywide. And it was a pretty hefty document, and had very specific examples of what a Spanish style would look like, what a Tudor style,
Right,
what
right.
different things and design elements, so that those could be incorporated appropriately to the right type of house. So
Right.
you don't get a mishmash of things. I don't know what happened to all of that. The staff worked very hard on it, spent countless hours, and came up with a beautiful document. They hired consultants, they had all kinds of different people, they had architects working on it. It was quite an effort. So that exists somewhere. I know Melanie's been around for a while, maybe she remembers this document.
Madam Chair, if I may, we currently do have the citywide design guidelines, and our staff uses them, but they're just that guidelines, right? And so our code enforcement has continuously always said that it's hard to enforce those because those are not codified. So we, as best we can, is we look at additions and we look at new structures and implement those and make sure that, like you mentioned, houses are in context with the neighborhood and the setting. Actually, as part of what you guys have, what I'll call dais today, or a table, is an excerpt of that to chapter, I think, 13, which is the guidelines for historic. Now we have guidelines for single-family homes, guidelines for commercial, so we, on the day-to-day basis, use those guidelines. So it's not a tool that we don't use, we use them. But what we can certainly do is, as Director Min mentioned, is we can bring this to the council, but I just want to make the commission aware that this almost falls into kind of a quasi-district setting, right? You'll also have to take into account that you'll most likely have to notify these neighborhoods that now they're not historic districts, they're not subject to any of these special requirements, and all of a sudden, at the direction of the commission and maybe the direction of the council, there's a desire to place limitations on what they can do. And so part of what we would have to vet is not only establish criteria, guidelines, boundaries for the term historically sensitive area, but also notify these neighborhoods and let them know, hey, you residents, this is what the cities would like to do. And I feel like at some point we still have to get buy-off from those neighborhoods. So while I respect and understand kind of the concern that you guys want to do, there's also that consideration too. So just wanted to make you guys aware. To Commissioner Tardif's point earlier, I do believe, I remember that code section you're talking about. I believe the power is recommendation of the commission, though. The council has the ultimate authority to actually designate a district. So how my understanding of that code section reads is, through the application process, we could bring a request to designate a local district the commission can make a recommendation, but the ultimately approving body would be the city council to formally designate the district. And it is based on those 4 criteria that you mentioned.
Well, I agree with you that, it's all subject to the city council, but it doesn't really say that it's a recommendation. It says we can make a resolution and designate it as a historical area, or even a single building or structure. And if the city, then it would be up to the city council to deny that or overturn it.
So-
That's the way I read it.
So how a general plan can work to the benefit of our discussion here is that through the historical element, cultural element, you can create policy on how to go about the creation of these historically sensitive neighborhoods. You can also identify ahead of time some of the neighborhood that you see now that could potentially be there. And so that becomes a policy of the general plan that outlines process for going about. Because it is a public process, because land and property ownership rights are being affected, you want to have that neighborhood be understanding of what the goal of the city is doing. So then as an implementation, after it's adopted, then you go through the process of identifying the neighborhood, go through the process of application, for lack of a better word, right, for its eligibility, and then it goes to the commission for recommendation, and it goes to the city council for final approval. That gives that whole process a transparent process by which, there's public input. So in the case of, let's say, Floral Park, right, you would go through the process of identifying and making a recommendation, identifying, what criteria you believe that neighborhood falls into in terms of designation, make the recommendation, go to the city council. Through that process, we would then notify the public, all property owners, tenants in that area, of the intent to designate this and what does that mean to property right? What does that mean to modification? And through that process, I believe it will create the opportunity for designating, reduce some of the cost concerns that are associated with this, because locally we can designate some local. I mean, it is within our authority to do that. We don't have to go to the level of state and go to the level of federal, but create some, at least, protection locally for what your concerns are. Does that?
I think the neighborhoods we're talking about would welcome being called a historically sensitive area. That's not too restrictive for people. I see all the work that Floral Park has done for years, having individual surveys on every house, and I mean the level of work is tremendous for that. So to expect other neighborhoods to have the funds to do that on their own is unrealistic. They have money because they have a very successful home tour, but not every neighborhood does that. So we need to find a way to help the neighborhoods that we're talking about, which is not the whole city. It's probably 10 neighborhoods citywide, and the people that live there move there because they love old houses and they love the neighborhood. Park Santiago is a great example of that. I mean, the city tried to push back on the 2525, saying you're not a historic neighborhood, and the people that lived there went ballistic. They're like, what do you mean we're not historic? Look at these houses. I mean, they moved there because of that. So I just want to acknowledge those neighborhoods and prevent them from going off the deep end.
And I hear you, and I hear the commission. I think, again, it comes to communication. What I understand from the staff perspective was that we, the staff deals with code-specific requirements. We're not deaf to the fact that, it's a neighborhood that has a lot of pride. It has history. But from our perspective, we were looking at, from the code, how do we apply the code? So I just want to clarify, we're not deaf to your concerns.
No.
It's just that the response from staff was because of the envelope and parameter that we work in, it didn't fall under that. You were asking the staff to do and take certain steps that is clearly outlined in the code that does not apply. So I just want to let you know we're not deaf to your concerns. We just want to find a way to make sure that we're talking about the same thing and really reflect the concern of the community. So that's why I think this process will be helpful. We can help flesh out, but if what I summarize is the goal, what you're looking for, we can work with Pedro and flesh out a process for that, and you can review it.
Sounds good.
You know,
I think
certainly,
that's it, yeah.
certainly a locally
Yeah.
identified historically sensitive neighborhood can have a level of heightened review, what I would call it, but it won't rise to the level of becoming a state designated or federally designated historical neighborhood. That's the level you want to see.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Rush?
Well, I was just going to say, there, an example of what your concern was, Pedro, was the planning department designated the Maharaji House as a historic home, and that kind of, against even the will of the homeowner, and the changes, and that kind of helped them not tear and change that structure completely.
Yeah.
Just as a little bit of history, because I came on this commission in 2000 originally, there was a lot of pushback from the community. People did not want their homes listed when this was all brand new and a new thing. It took a while for the public to embrace it, but now people want that. They see it as a badge of honor, and so it's the tide has changed in terms of the public's perception.
So to help guide our formulation, can you tell us what 10 neighborhood that you at least, you know?
Yeah, we can tell you right now.
It would be good because it will help guide some of our.
Wilshire Square,
Washington Square.
Washington Square.
East Side, Pettinger Park.
Slow down so we can.
Park.
You want to send it to us?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
we're doing our
You know what?
presentation.
Might as well
We're
send
doing
it to
our
us.
presentation
Sure.
Yeah.
for another
Great,
50.
thank you. That'd be great.
Then they can move on.
Okay.
We did our homework.
I'm sure you
For
did.
the 150th.
Could I make a comment to add on to that? I think, that's all great for the neighborhoods. I think also it should be included for the downtown area. There are historic areas of downtown they're not designated as National Historic Register, but they're historic areas, and they're historic
Some of
buildings.
downtown is already.
Yeah.
Are you
Well,
looking
yeah,
at the entire
but there are
downtown?
areas of downtown they're not designated
Right, right.
national.
I know.
historic, And
That's what
they
I'm
should
saying.
be not
You're talking about the
excluded
entire
from this
downtown.
process.
All of downtown.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if it's a older structure, 50-plus years old, yeah, I think it should require some special review.
Absolutely. And Logan area, that's one that people many times forget.
Okay.
But in.
Two
but in
separate
there-
conversations I'm hearing
Yeah.
now. I just want to make sure. One is downtown, but no, one is just historically sensitive neighborhood and how to treat modification of structures there. Another criteria you're talking about is a set criteria of 50 years or more. Those, are you saying anything 50 years or more, regardless of where they are in the city?
In the downtown area.
Well, including the downtown area.
Well,
Anywhere.
around all of the city, throughout the city.
I think most of the city's over 50 years old, so
So-
that would be
That's
that would
pretty
be a
much
big
citywide,
burden, I
yeah.
think.
So are you helping us to narrow it down then?
Yes. Yeah.
Just
To certain neighborhoods. I mean, maybe somebody wants to add their neighborhood to that list once it goes public or whatever.
So 50 years or older structures in historically sensitive neighborhood.
Right.
Yes.
And like I'm bringing up, it's Logan. You guys completely forget at times Logan area, and which is so important because it's not downtown, it's further east on there, and that's historically significant to a great population of our community. So make sure that, Logan is looked at on this.
We'll look at how we can potentially help craft some criteria that are not monetary related, but more of things that neighborhood can do to start nominating himself and come into this process. I'll work with Pedro to look into that. We may not have an answer, but I'll promise you I'll look into it. But to be clear, you don't necessarily want to protect all structure that are 50 years or older. You want to protect structures that are 50 years or older within historically sensitive neighborhood that's been designated, so that it doesn't apply citywide.
Including downtown.
I understand that.
Okay.
Including Logan.
Are we clear?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
then we can move on.
What I did want to mention before we move on, Madam Chair, if I may, is that we certainly share the concern and appreciation for historic sensitivity, and we're on the same page. I feel like some of the limitations the staff has now is working with outdated surveys that we have. And so what we'd like to do is, as objectives for the following years and years to come, is kind of retool our program to maybe have the opportunity to get more grants or find the money somewhere, so then we can start doing the surveys again and surveying areas that have already been surveyed. But since then, we have more historic areas, more structures that are 50 years old, and then start surveying new areas like Logan or areas that we haven't, and start introducing some of these ways to start preserving the neighborhoods, as you mentioned. So that would certainly help the neighborhoods. I know Commissioner Schaefer mentioned that it's cost prohibitive to do that. But if there's any opportunity for us to find the money somewhere to start some of the surveys, those are always great resources. So.
Please use your library and the Heritage Museum, because of the fact that they have articles going way back, especially at the Heritage, for different of the minority populations that started here and right here, to bring you up to date on how significantly it's important on the area. Some of the center part of the city, center south or a little west, historic for the start of the African American community here, what they did, their businesses. That is neat to preserve, because you still have structures there. Masonic Temple, you have the house that Second Baptist started out, that's still there. So I'm suggesting, for you to look at the areas that, once again, you're not familiar with, and work with the museum. Kevin has done a tremendous amount of research on those areas. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, Commissioner Rush.
Yes,
Who
sorry.
has just joined us. Okay. Did you accidentally went to the city council?
I did. I went in there and I'm looking around, I'm thinking, who are all these people? These are not my commissioners.
Okay. Did you want to talk again?
I did. I just want to make sure we're talking about two different things. One is, we're talking about developing a criteria and selecting neighborhoods that make them like historically sensitive neighborhoods.
Right.
And then also, again, allowing the public to preview that whole list before we do that.
Right.
And then have the city council approve it. Then when something happens in one of those neighborhoods, the planning department takes a close look at the kind of changes that we want to make in the neighborhood. But you also have other areas that aren't in one of those neighborhoods, that's still a structure that's 50 years old, would still come in front of the Historical Resource Commission if it was going to be demolished or something.
So that's-
Are you talking about the Whittier ordinance?
Similar to that, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about, because I think I thought we settled it, but apparently
It's
not.
two things.
Yes,
Okay,
that's what,
good.
yeah.
I want to make sure we're still clear.
So the two things that I thought we were clear on is that, because it sounds like you want to talk about the 50-year-old criteria again.
No. I just want to make sure we're including that we're not, the historical neighborhood idea isn't overtaking the 50-year thing.
They are two separate issues.
They're two separate issues, I
Okay.
agree.
Okay.
But I thought we
Good.
agreed that they also became common because historically sensitive neighborhood, that any structure that's in there that's 50 years or older gets the height level review once we establish the district. Is that right?
A heightened review, yes. with
Yeah,
the
the boundary.
Because if the homes
Correct.
were,
Yeah.
built in the 80s, you're not asking for them to be.
Right, right,
No.
right.
So, within the district that's designated historically sensitive, you want for us to help come up with criteria and for establishing those districts, and also criteria for review of modification of structures when they're 50 years or older. They need to have that heightened level of review.
Right.
Right, perfect example.
So, just so I understand.
Well, let me give you an
Right.
example, maybe it helps. So, this First American building?
Yes.
It's not in a historic district.
Not now, but
Not now,
it could be.
but even, we may not even want to designate that area a historic district in the future, right?
So
It may
right
not
now,
make sense to.
that is a great example. So right now, the commission is saying, agreeing that if it's not within the historically sensitive neighborhood, even though it's 50 years or older, it's not going to get reviewed. That's what I'm hearing.
It should be reviewed.
it
should
be
be
reviewed.
reviewed.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the point.
It
Yes.
should, so you want to establish 50 years or older throughout the city?
Correct, correct.
Really?
And you
We
can
wanna do
model
that?
it.
I thought we were centering on districts, areas.
That's, see,
Well, we
They're
are.
two
That's
separate
two separate
issues.
issues.
They're two separate issues. This all started because, well, I don't know if it all started, but it got continued because a number of us complained about the fact that when Hallie was here, we weren't complaining about her, but she had a great process that if somebody came to the counter and they were going to pull permits to do something in East Side or Washington Square or Wilshire Square or West Floral Park or something, or even Floral Park, neighborhoods that are not quote-unquote National Register districts, why they were red flagged and they were shuffled over to Hallie, and Hallie got a chance to visit with them and counsel them about, gee, do you really want to put in vinyl windows? Or do you want to tear off the siding, etc. Okay? Well, when the recession hit, why that process went out the window because everybody was tightening their belts. Well, then when the economy got better, that position was never restored and that process was never restored. And so Jeff Dickman and I had a couple of meetings with Candida and I think Pedro. Pedro, weren't you there?
I think I was in one of those.
We had one or two meetings with Candida and brought this issue up, and they're, so not to rehash that, but that's that issue. Then separately, Phil Schaefer had given to us, several of us, or, well, me, that's on the board of Preserve Orange County, an ordinance that Whittier has, which is where their local version of us, their historic commission, that's part of the process there, that if you're gonna demo a building that's 50 years or older and not on the register, that it goes before the Historic Resources Commission, or whatever they locally call it in Whittier. It's just part of the process. Had that process been in place, we'd have a very different scenario than what we have with the First American building, in many respects. But that's what
Understood.
we're going after.
Understood.
So they are two separate issues.
Understood.
Yeah,
So I think even among the commissioners, you have different perspective on that. So we haven't gone past this issue yet. Because
I don't think we have different perspectives.
Well, I just think 50 years that takes in the entire city.
No, it doesn't. And that doesn't mean,
90%.
Mike, that doesn't mean that everybody or every building that is historic, are we saying it's worthy of being saved? No.
Right, I
We're just simply
understand that.
saying that we want a chance to look at it. I mean, this First American is, hate to beat a almost dead horse, but.
Well, I agree with you on First American,
Yeah.
but the way we're talking now, that would be in a local historic district.
Not necessarily.
No, it's not in.
I know it's not, but that's what we're talking about.
But before you came in, we talked about establishing local districts that are not the federal and the state.
Right.
That would include like downtown, the greater downtown, would
Right.
include West Floral Park, the neighborhoods you mentioned. So there may be 10 plus or minus neighborhoods citywide that we want to have a special level of review when somebody comes to the counter versus, they just, as complies with the code, you can build it, Somebody needs to look at it from an aesthetic or design point of view.
Well, I guess
So,
my
Commissioner
concern would
Rush,
be that if you.
so from what we understood out of that was anywhere, any structure that's 50 years or older within these local designated district would get that heightened level of review that you're talking about, but it doesn't apply citywide. So that's what the commission was talking about is, number one, the creation of local district, not necessarily state or historical, but even at the local level, it deserved that heightened level of review. And then within that, any structure that's 50 years or older
as we move past, 50 years will change, but 50 years or older then gets reviewed. Anything younger than that doesn't get reviewed at that heightened level.
So my only concern with that is, I mean, there are structures all around the city
Yes.
that maybe aren't in a historically sensitive neighborhood.
Yeah.
They were a farmhouse, and now there's tract houses all around them. So
Right.
I would still want, if somebody wanted to come and tear down that farmhouse, I think that would be
So
something that we
potentially you could be
look
talking
at.
citywide, and
Absolutely.
probably 80% of the structures in the cities are older than,
But
Probably
again,
in
we're
the
talking about,
compatible.
we're talking about a demo permit.
right.
We're talking about a demo permit.
Or building modifications. I think what we're talking about here, building modification, demo permits. So potentially we have 78,000 buildings in the city. Potentially that could be 80% of all the city. I'm not saying yes or no, I'm just telling you, this is what it is. Is that what you want to apply it to?
So I think a lot, okay, we can take a big percentage of those are tract homes that were built in the
Right.
60s and 70s, that sort of thing. I don't think we're necessarily talking about putting that level of scrutiny on those properties, but on all the neighborhoods that have things that are from the 1950s or older. I think those we want to be more careful about.
And that would become your ethnic sensitive areas that I've brought up, okay, in the central part of the city, because you've got the churches, and you've got all those homes around those churches at the beginning of different groups and so forth, that, you don't exclude on that.
Then it sounds like we're back to anything 50 years or older, then just get the heightened level review.
Not necessarily, because most of them had started, yeah.
That's,
So
I mean, to
about
put it
in the
simply,
40s and-
right, then we would
40s,
come up with a criteria that said if you're 50 years or older, we need to review for architectural, historical, and if those check marks don't hit, then you get processed the ministerial staff review. If those check mark hits, then you need to go to a heightened level review. That's what you're asking for.
Well, to some degree, yes, we are, but I would, when you consider there's 65 organized neighborhood associations in the city.
Of course, we recognize
Okay,
that.
and we're talking about historically sensitive neighborhoods might be, what, 12, 14 of those? I don't think it's fair to say that we're talking about 50% of the housings or the building stock in the city.
No, the
Because when you
criteria,
exclude out the industrial and the schools and this and that, I can't believe we're talking about 50% of the buildings in the city. I doubt that. But in any event, you'll have to do your own research. I just want to make certain that we're not being set up for failure, because if the city council says, oh, they want to review 80% of all building changes, that's probably going to fail.
Right.
And
You
I
want-
think that's an inaccurate number.
If I may, Tim, would you want to consider a date? Somebody mentioned 1950. Anything 1950 or older would need to be reviewed?
Well, I'm not going to get hung up on that.
well, I think we're trying to help communicate to what you want to do. We don't want to come back with, so if your goal is to protect something that is in a certain era or before, let us know. If you don't think anything that was built after the 60s or the 70s is something that should be considered at this point, let's focus on what you want to protect.
I need to get an older house.
Yeah. But once again, let's look at areas.
You
or-
still want us to look at historically sensitive neighborhood?
That,
Yes.
where you have the beginning of ethnic groups in our community, okay? You gotta look at it that way. You gotta look at Logan. You
Right.
gotta look at, coming in Bella Vista area, all of those areas down there, because that was the beginning of different ethnicities coming into our cities. And they've got buildings there that are not on homes, but like I said, Masonic temples. They also
Downtown.
have their churches there at the same time. I just don't want just to say,
a certain area
You can throw
above,
Logan?
let's say,
Okay.
First Street or
I
whatever,
want-
because that wasn't the roots of those. And every person or every ethnicity have contributed to this city.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And we cannot not include them in this, in this historic sensitive protection.
What I recognize now, right now, today, is that the current code, the current purview, the current parameters for identifying, protecting historical resources does not meet at least this commission's goal.
Correct.
We know that. So what I really want to hear is what are your goals so that we can help at least make recommendation to craft the changes that will reflect that. I'm also hearing that in addition to physical age architecture, you're also looking at cultural cultural significance, right? Those are elements that are very much generally also included as well. So you want to include elements of cultural review into this process.
Right, because according to you, Executive Director Ty, this will also coordinate with the general plan.
It could, yes. Could have
Absolutely.
very well come
So-
together.
So we want to more or less, as far as my concern, coordinate with that general plan, to make it, much more identifiable and we're all on the same page.
Right, but I think our goal is also how to make sure that it's so successful implemented so that
Absolutely.
it doesn't create this such a big net. It casts such a big net that it includes everything. Your goal is to look at how to cast a net that would capture elements of historical structure, historical event, historical neighborhood that would then get that heightened level of review.
Absolutely.
Tall order, but we'll try.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
We'll try. Thank you.
For coming in? Okay.
Japanese couple of.
Are you clear, Pedro? Okay.
I think we got enough to work with.
Okay.
So the next concern really ties into a lot of the conversations we actually have already started having, and that's the topic of historic resource protection and enforcement. So this ties in with the historically sensitive areas topic. So our current historic ordinance provides the safeguards against demolition of structures that are designated, as we all know. An application and public hearing are required through this commission for the opportunity to review and request such, alternatives. So, for example, if someone who has a historically listed structure wanted to demolish, there is an application process. They would apply for it, the commission would review it, and then we would come up with options, perhaps maybe moving or relocating the structure, somehow maybe documenting the structure before ultimately the decision of the commission to whether approve it for demolition or not. Additionally, the ordinance also provides requirements for major exterior modifications. The Commission has seen them before as HEMA applications or historic exterior modification applications. The process ensures that the applicant abides by not only the city requirements and guidelines, but a set of standards that have been nationally accepted and implemented. Structures that are considered eligible but designated do not have the same protection unless there's a discretionary action involved in which SECO would be triggered. So part of what was talked about and maybe at least brushed upon in the last conversation was the process of our demolition. It's currently ministerial. So if the commission wanted to move forward and recommend to the council those actions that you guys previously talked about, it would require changing the process of demolition to not be ministerial and be discretionary, right? The commission would have the discretion to review structures over 50 years old and approve them or deny them for demolition. So that's what they're talking about. Currently, our demolition process, like I said, is not ministerial. Let's see. So for review of alterations to the historic structures, whether they're considered major or minor alterations. Our staff takes a look at what's called the Secretary of Interior standards, and the Commission might already be aware and familiar with these standards because they're included as part of the staff reports for every HEMA application that we put together. These standards are a nationally recognized tool and an accepted benchmark at all levels of government, national, state, and local, for evaluating the acceptability of proposed changes to the historic properties. The standards are not meant to prevent change. Instead, they represent a framework for managing the change. The standards do not require every feature of a historic property be preserved, but they do seek to preserve the most significant character-defining features of a historic structure. So you've seen a lot of examples. Probably the most recent one, which is currently being undertaken, is 200 North Main, the Builders Exchange building. It's currently going through some alterations and modifications that this commission saw and approved. And so the idea was not to kind of prohibit those, maybe what some would consider modern approaches, but to kind of integrate it and make sure that the character-defining features of the most important facades along Main and Second were preserved. And maybe the ones that are not as significant, that were historically adjacent to another building, those would be the areas that modifications would be permitted. Let's see. So these standards are required for us to, we're required to review these standards as a certified local government. So as a certified local government, we are bound by certain criteria and responsibilities, and one of those is to use these standards. We also have, as mentioned earlier, our citywide design guidelines that are not specific to just historic. We have, single family, as I mentioned, commercial, but specific to historic structures, we have the Chapter 13, which is Historic Structure Guidelines. What you'll see in this Chapter 13, which each of the commissioners has, is we've more or less kind of adopted the Secretary of Interior standards and kind of worked around kind of language around context, language about, architecture significance. It actually mirrors in a lot of ways the standards that Orange has or the standards that Anaheim has regarding how we treat historic structures. And so specifically, the standards are included in Appendix C. So those are standards straight from the Secretary of Interior standards. The most common that you'll see, actually, I think I maybe missed a step. Okay. So the standards offer 4 distinct approaches to treatment of historic properties, and those are included up there: preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. The standard that we see mostly here for HEMA applications is rehabilitation. So that's the opportunity to take, for example, a single-family home and maybe take a look at potential additions to accommodate larger family requirements. The idea is not to maybe restrict a homeowner and say you can never make alterations, you can never modify it to accommodate your family now, for a structure that maybe was designed 1920s, had maybe a smaller kitchen, smaller living room. So the idea really is to kind of stay within what the uses are now, historically, make modifications consistent with the standards, and allow a homeowner kind of a new space. That's it for this one. Like I said, a lot of the conversations have already been happening with this commission regarding kind of the sensitive areas. So if you wanted to add anything else, we'd be happy to listen. Otherwise, we can move forward to the next item.
Okay, commissioners? Commissioner Hithersdale?
Yeah, I think that we covered most of this already, and it would come under the issue of the 50-year rule for structures anywhere in the city.
Anyone else? Okay, you did a great job.
So the last item, the last item for conversation tonight is the issue of preservation of historic trees. So we've heard this from the commission at a couple commission meetings regarding how we can preserve trees that may be designated or designate trees that may be potentially historic. So currently our Chapter 30 does not consider designation of trees. It's specific in saying that only building, structures, objects, or a site be designated as historic. So those are only 4 areas that could have the potential to be historic. So what would be required would be either the commission requested the council modify our Chapter 30 through a zoning code amendment to include, trees and include criteria of how to maybe designate those or recognize them. We did look at a lot of examples from different cities that currently have similar ordinances. And a lot of what they've established, they describe these trees as either heritage trees, historic, landmark, or legacies. And they take a look at what maybe significance they might have had to an area. As maybe a comment earlier today was mentioned, palm trees that maybe were planted in 1920s or something, along when the track was originally constructed. That might be some sort of criteria that the commission could recommend. Another criteria that was common in these ordinances is how to define the species of the tree. The age, the historic significance, the ecological value, the aesthetics. So these are all kind of criteria that we could look to establish if the commission would like to request that the council do so. And as mentioned, it would require zoning code amendment. So I know Director Mintai has worked in a city that actually had an ordinance for historic trees. So he probably would be most familiar with kind of how you would take a look maybe at a tree and determining its trunk size or something to say that, every tree that has a specific trunk size would be eligible, or every tree of this species, like an oak tree, would be eligible. Maybe not so much palm trees or trees that are much more common, but trees that might have some significance to the history, or orange groves, for example, avocado groves, things of that nature.
So my personal experience is that obviously I think trees is a great feature of any city, and the more we have, the better, I think, the environment, but also creates value for property values. And it creates an environment that is going to help with quality of life, enhancing the quality of life. But depending on how you structure the protection, it could also be very prohibitive to development as well. And depending on the goal of development, what you want to do with it, the best that I've seen is not one that protects every tree. I've seen that extreme. Are the ones that create something that's significant locally, but also it protects older trees that are, that you just can't replace, right? 100-year-old tree with, 60-foot tall and big canopy, you cut down one of those and replace it with a 36-foot box, it's going to take you another generation to get there. So it limits it to certain size, limited to certain specimens such as oak, sycamore, local trees, heritage trees, or if the trees have some level of real significance that you would designate. You just don't automatically designate protection of all trees. It's very prohibitive, but it also causes a lot of issues for enforcement for us, because what we find is that people will just cut down trees if they find it too difficult. So the community would need to look at what it's considered as worth protecting. And I think those elements that needs to be considered worth protecting are the ones that are mature, because those are the ones that add the most value to our environment. The oak trees, the sycamore, the trees with beautiful, majestic structures. Those needs to be protected because they not only have environmental value, they have visual and aesthetic values. So, Dale will be very mad at me for this, but most cities don't protect palm trees because they don't have those elements. But locally, it doesn't mean we can't say certain type of palm trees are significant to us. So I think we need to walk through and look at how do we want to protect that meets our criteria of preserving our environment, not desecrating, and making it look like a desert, but also provide opportunity for thoughtful development to take place. So, some of the basic criteria I will give you right now are specimens that are native to us, especially oak trees, sycamore trees, or pepper trees. Those trees that have majestic value, right? What grand majestic value? We can start looking at that. We can start looking at trees that are of certain trunk size and certain height. You want to protect those because they have environmental value besides just the aesthetic values, and maybe even location. If it's in the front yard, you want to protect. If it's in the backyard, you don't want to protect. That's an option as well. Generally, most cities will exempt trees in the public right-of-way because, as a city, there are many circumstances that
that would prevent us from just going through the process. And I'll tell you, the experience I've had is that there was a specimen of trees, I think they were liquid ambers, that were all planted in a tract that is about 80 years old. The trees were at the end of its life. They also were damaged and hollow out from the inside because of pest issues. But because of the protection ordinance, it didn't, it created this restriction, and what happened was they became a liability for the city as the tree were falling down. It created that liability. So in the public right-of-way, most city will exempt themselves from that process. That doesn't mean that you don't want to have it protected, which you already do. You have the ETAC, which I think we have a representative here that reviews public trees. So you may not want to delve into that process, but really look at just the private development, because we already have something that protects, at least in the public right-of-way and on public properties. So those are some of my, just suggestion, and I think we should have a discussion, and we can help craft something back that would.
On the public right-of-way, my neighborhood would love to get rid of jacarandas, but they can't. That's a city tree, so you got to conclude the city tree being, the designated city tree has to be, because you did not mention that one. But yeah, that's so I'm going to bring it back to the council. I mean the commission. Okay, Commissioner Rush.
I'm glad that we're having a chance to chat about this, and it would seem to me that it would be our job maybe to make a friendly recommendation to ETAC or to the council to create an ordinance to protect trees, historic trees, but make the supervision, the enactor, the enforcement of that municipal code provision under the purview of ETAC. They seem to be the rightful ones to do that. I mean, we're not experts on trees. They deal with tree issues all of the time. Wouldn't that make sense?
So it would, but I think the beginning stage of discussion first is, what do we protect?
Well, okay.
Right. So
I'm always a believer in never reinventing the wheel. So why don't we have staff reach out to the whatever 8 or 10 cities? There must be a dozen of them at least in the state or in the West who have some sort of an ordinance, and we can use that as our template.
Excellent.
And I mean, no need to reinvent the wheel. And
we'll come back with something reasonable for you to look at.
Yeah. So there we go.
Probably.
Fair enough.
LA County, you can find quite a few, Pasadena and.
Yeah. We have some good
older
examples.
communities, similar.
We have some good examples. But I do want to convey, I think trees needs to be protected because it creates not only economic benefit, environmental benefit, but it makes the quality of life much different.
This is a minor detail, but perhaps, men, you could have one of your staff look into, and this is sort of directly out of your purview, but I'm sure you know who to call. The county, of course, they got that fence around the Civic Center, and they're going to start doing all this demo on all these various buildings, the Hall of Records and so forth. Well, the Hall of Records building right on the southwest corner of Broadway and Civic Center had, I believe they were magnolia trees on the east side of the building right along Broadway. And those trees, as well as maybe some other plants in there, had bronze plaques on cement slabs that were installed by Adeline Walker's Santa Ana Garden Club. And I sure hope those were not hauled off and destroyed. I know the trees are gone.
The plaque?
Yeah, there was a bronze plaque for each one. It had the Latin, botanical name for each of the items, specimen trees and so forth.
Let me see if I can locate it.
And
Can I say something on that?
Sure.
Well, I've talked to someone about the bronze plaques, specifically on the assessor's building, and he's actually going to dig that up out of the sidewalk and give it to me in the next couple days. And he said they were saving all the bronze plaques and putting them in storage for right now until someone can claim them or whatever.
Do you have a name?
Yeah, first name is Steve, I can give you the phone number.
Can you, please?
But he's not just trashing these plaques. He
Okay,
doesn't know what
that's
to do
good.
with them, and so he's just kind of collecting them for right now.
You're right, it is out of my purview, but I'd be more than happy to make contact.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any else? Okay, well, we have some people in the audience. Gail, you're up.
Now I can officially talk.
You can officially talk.
Thank you, Pedro, good job.
Thank you, Pedro. Let's give Pedro a hand.
Dale Helvig again. Just a couple things. Age of the trees should also be considered. Whether you think palm trees are important or not, I think a 100-year-old tree plus is important to save. And, you know, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, so age should be a factor. Concerning the 50-year age of property, we have 1,148 homes in Park Santiago that are over 50 years old. You're right, not all of them need to be covered by historic status, but if you just establish a 50-year-old criteria on it, you're going to have a house right around the corner that does meet the criteria, and the other one right around the corner that was built in 1924 or something is going to be impacted by, oh, we don't need to worry about controlling this property over here. It's the neighborhood that needs to be addressed, and so just the age of the house should not be used. It depends on where it's located at. We have information in the general plan for historic districts, and it's not just the historic districts designated by the state or federal government. We go off and talk about Floral Park, even though it's going to historical status. We talk about Wilshire Square and Washington Square. We talk about that in the general plan. We've just chosen to ignore that. And I can speak specifically on Park Santiago. It says that we should protect historically significant districts. 2525 is in Park Santiago neighborhood by city documents, but yet we've chosen to ignore that fact. And so if we follow even the current general plan, we would be protecting districts. But we're not following the general plan as it's stated now. You talk about putting stuff in the general plan to protect these districts, well, it's not going to do any good if we don't follow it. So, the other thing is, you know, the area of the neighborhoods really needs to be well defined, because that's how we're getting through these loopholes. You know, we don't know what the boundaries of these districts are, or we choose to ignore those boundaries. So, that's all I got to say right now.
Thank you so much. Do you want your note?
Yeah, thanks.
Is that okay? Okay, Janelle.
No, my son brought it online for me.
Hello.
Hello. My name is Janelle McLaughlin. I'm the chairman of ETAC and have been voted chairman for 4 years. I have loved trees and have protected trees in our city for over 25 years. I'd like to explain something that has been rumored around. This past, I went off.
Your time is up, Jennifer.
A very wise man, a very wise man. So actually this week, we were told that ETAC did not have the right to vote on a tree to be removed or not to be removed. And that we also reported to the executive director of Public Works. Well, defined by the legal, John just defined to us within the last 48 hours. ETAC is a commission that is an advisory commission directly to the city council. Different than other commissions. It advises direct to the city council. ETAC has the prerogative to recommend by vote if we remove a tree or we don't remove a tree. Now, that is in parkways, that is in medians, that is, so every development that comes on in the past 4 years, we have the developmental plans put in front of us. We have the photographs of the trees. We have often gone out to look and see what it really looked like and how many open wells there are and everything else that we do visit. I used Claremont as a tree city that has very high standards. They have an urban forestry division. I recommend to do that, to contact them foolishly. Do not do Irvine and the different cities that you think that it has been done in the past. But Claremont has a very good status. I went online and did my study too of what is a historic tree, because you had 5 questions to answer for your workshop, and with Historic Commission having 2 that pertain to trees, I was amazed at a workshop pertaining to questions out of 5 to trees. I think the first thing is that you, in a historic tree and looking at Atlanta and looking at all my research, you determine if that's a healthy tree. I know Min was explaining the story there, but that's the first thing that you do. Is that tree healthy? Does that tree still have life in it? Does that tree have the safety of the neighborhood and the surrounding people? You do look at the age of the tree as well. And then it's not necessarily how wide the tree is, because if a tree has a lot of water growing up, it just will widen. You don't determine age necessarily by...
I'm extending her tongue.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, thank you very much.
Can't get it up.
Because my microphone didn't work. So such as like an acorn tree, you can determine when they stop producing acorns that tree is 50 years old. So there's a lot of things that when you start to look at your species, you do not limit yourself to that. I agree it should be in ETAC. I agree that this decision, I think ETAC should set their own standards of what is a historic and a landmark tree. I think we need to look at the criteria, because you have the age, you have the historic significance. I love the word, the majestic. I mean, I love that word, because I'll tell you that's exactly how I feel driving down Spurgeon and looking at the 100-year-old trees that are higher than anything else in the city, swaying in the wind, and I feel they are majestic. I feel when you drive down Wilshire Boulevard, the same, majestic. So I'm glad you used that word, and I do have a feeling of majestic when I see a palm tree swing. So
Me too.
So, location and setting, cultural of a significance, size, habitat, and species status. And I know Santa Ana has the oak trees, and they use the oak trees as a tree of Santa Ana, but I don't think we should limit species of our trees, because we have multiple species in the city. I fought aggressively with the city because they turned off the water to our medians, and that was not what the state recommended. The state said you can water your trees, and we did not. So we have destroyed so many trees. We have 4,900 ill trees, sick, diseased, water deprived. So I think the idea of sitting here and starting to protect these trees, we as a city do not feed them, we do not take care of them, we do not spray them, we do not do anything. I think if we look down the road, if we can have an urban forest, such as San Francisco has a fabulous urban forest. Those are the quick things. I think it goes back to ETAC, and I promise you and I commit to you that I will make sure that we have a formal way for you to review them. But there's not a tree that should be cut down that ETAC doesn't have the opportunity to make a recommendation to the city council. So everything that you've heard in the last couple of weeks, this is hot off the press from the legal Santa Ana lawyers here. So that's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mark, I got 2 things for you. What
We
did
had 2 different forms, so I figured I'd pull up one each. Actually, 20 minutes.
He only gets 3 minutes.
For you, Janelle is special. You, 3
I get 3
minutes.
2 minutes?
3 minutes.
1.5.
Anybody want to go lower?
Depends on what you're going to say.
There you go. Okay, so just a couple comments to fill in. One of the things it's talking about.
Green.
Okay, now we're good. Start the clock now. No.
Restart it.
Anyway, couple things. When you talk about designating a neighborhood as historically beneficial and, go after it, I think one of the things we have to look at is that we look at the neighborhoods, but, some of the neighborhoods don't necessarily have a complete capability of being a historic neighborhood. There are neighborhoods that maybe one or two streets or areas, and I think what we have to do is look at that aspect and determine, how is it that certain in other words, even set priorities from a neighborhood point of view to say, this neighborhood may be a great neighborhood to be historically preserved, but let's start with this section here and work our way. That also offsets some of the costs of that the neighborhoods might have to go through. Instead of getting a neighborhood like Park Santiago with 1,000 homes, maybe there's a neighborhood that has 50 homes, like maybe there's parts of Logan that could be done. And that could be a more inexpensive proposition for the neighborhood as well as for the city. I think the other thing that there's a little bit of a flaw in the discussion about if somebody comes up to the permit desk and says, I'd like to do this, and the planner says, well, you're in a historically designated area. I have a problem with that, because one of the issues that came up in the last go-around of about 70 houses that submitted their paperwork, there was at least 5 or 6 that were asked to go back and get permits for work that had already been done. So the assumption that everybody that is going to make a modification to their home is getting a permit, I think is flawed. I think you have to take a different approach, and I think what we have to do is, if we're going to designate areas as historically capable of being preserved, we need to, the HRC has to go out, the city has to go out and tell these neighborhoods, this is what we're doing with respect to your neighborhood, so that the people know that and start to take that into consideration. Because if you're expecting it to happen at the permit desk, it's not going to happen 100%. And so I think that's a flaw that we have to look at from that perspective. And I think, going back to the financials and everything else, I said, when we look at the work that's being done, a lot of the times people come into our neighborhoods and they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars getting their house up to par. And then they decide to go in and submit that in for historic registry. But people are putting money in ahead of time. So, when you look at Millsack is giving you savings over time, and there's still some work that has to be done. It doesn't make, it takes into consideration that work that's future work. But I think what we have to look at, just from a city's perspective, is look at what the homeowner may have done already with respect to that property. And that could be significant in and of itself. That's it. I'm done. Drop the mic.
Thank you so much. Okay. Anyone else? Giving you an opportunity. If not, I want to again thank the staff. Okay, you did an excellent job. Thank you so much for the time and effort and keeping us straight and listening to our concern. Can't wait till January when you'll come back with the recommendations that we have.
And I would think with this much work, we'll need that much time. I just want to quickly say, if you can give me a moment, I think, listening to the comment, I was reminded that, yes, an urban forestry management plan is something that's a must, that you need to consider if you're looking at protecting trees, because that's a holistic way of not only looking at protection, but also future planning, future planting, and creating that structure of how do we replace something we're going to take away, replace something that we're going to die, and systematically replace trees that are just at the end of its life. So that is a significant aspect of tree preservation, protection, and that's resources that's going to be put in to create that function, to create that level of detail protection. So that is another level of investment that should be considered.
Okay. All right. Staff comments?
On your desk, I place a pen that advertises the planning and building agency. We just recently had this as a, giveaway so that it helps to promote us an agency. I know that we are a regulatory agency, so people needs to come to us anyways, but we don't want to come across that way. We want to come across friendly. We want to be able to share that we're here to help and we're just not someone who enforce. And then also we have a gift for you for the, I'm not going to say the word, so I'm just going to say 150th. The other word's too long, it's hard for me to pronounce. Sesquicentennial, but 150th anniversary card holder is a gift for you. For the commissioners in the room that's planning commission, you're next. I just don't want you to feel like you're being left out. Those gifts are coming to you as well.
I didn't know we could take gifts. I went to an ethical.
Under $5.
This was made in China.
I'm sorry. It's not a gift. These are memorabilia.
And everybody, don't worry, your parking validation is over here. See Laura, okay? And commissioner comments,
Just really quick, Madam Chair. We did receive your request to get printouts and handouts for the historic preservation booth. So we have copies here for you to take, and if you need more, let us know.
okay? That was in my comments,
Oh,
of
really?
what you were going to do. Thank you. That's for our booth, and I'll let you know what's in it, okay? Let's have Commissioner Hitterdale.
Just thanks again for a long and appreciate it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rush?
They're dead.
You went too long.
Oh, we went there. Okay, well, yes, thank you for all your hard work, and I look forward to seeing the results of all your synthesis and research in January. I do have a question, and that is, what are we gonna, do we have some plan as to what we're gonna do with I volunteered to work the booth on the 27th, which we're sharing with.
Are we sharing? I've never heard from anyone.
Well, I have a strong suspicion that someone will be there from the San Ana Historical Preservation Society, but do we have some plan as to what are we handing out something?
Once again, you're interfering with my comments.
All right, anyway, so
Okay.
that was a question, and I apologize for being tardy. I got stuck in meetings up in Burbank, but anyway, that's all I have. Thanks for the folks who came to share, Janelle and Mark, and those of you who came to share, Tom, Jeff, and Dale, and I'm sorry, who's with you, Dale? Who's sitting there?
Ellen.
Oh, Ellen. Oh, my
Nice to see
goodness,
you.
how are you? Yes. So, I have nothing further.
Commissioner Marashi.
Thanks for Pedro for excellent presentation and for the staff for having a great conversation with us and for everybody who attended and looking forward to seeing everybody at the 150th anniversary celebration.
Commissioner Wynn.
I just want to say thank you again to the staff and the public, and also looking forward to the celebration.
Commissioner Rebecca.
Same thing, just thanks to staff, everybody else.
You got inducted into baptism into historic.
Yeah, it's a good time to work studies.
Commissioner Tara.
I'd like to thank staff for taking into consideration the comments and direction of the commission. I think you guys do a real good job putting together our thoughts and direction. I'd like to thank the public for their input. And I'll just make a little announcement. I'm honored to have built a time capsule, fabricated a time capsule for the 150th celebration. Manufactured as part of sheet metal out of stainless steel to time capsule specifications, and Tim kind of checked me on that. I think you're okay with that, aren't you, Tim? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll be part of the ceremonies there for the time capsule presentation, and I think that takes place at 6 o'clock at the event.
We're not going to bury a car or anything like that.
It's 12 by 12 by 24. That's it.
Thank you.
Vice Chair.
Just like to echo the comments, thank the staff for listening to us, and hopefully we have some good results out of all of this for the future of Santa Ana for the next 50 years, and we move forward in a really positive fashion. I'm looking forward to that and anticipating that. Thank you to all the members of the public that came tonight to listen and participate, and that's important to those of us that serve as volunteers here, and we appreciate your input. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the 150th celebration.
Absolutely. Okay, my turn. Okay, yes, we're going to have a lot of stuff to hand out. We're going to have historic preservation copies of the awards, presentation awards to distribute, MILSAC application, historic register application, copies of the citywide design guidelines, French Park, Henninger Park, architectural, thank you, guidelines, and I think documents are important for reference in doing kind of construction, hopefully important reference, and copies of Santa Ana Historic Register is going to be in our booth, in addition to the team of Marushi, Schaefer, and Christie. We are
And Rush? No, I'm not included.
You didn't want it to finish
Oh,
yet.
I'm sorry.
You're jumping ahead. We are going to be representing the council presentation we did on the Historic Commission in January 2017. Was it 17? 17, right. It's January 2017. And thank to the beautiful tech guy over here who's going to bring it there. We added one of the criticisms that we got for our presentation was that we didn't point out on one of the slides of where our historic areas were. Well, we included that we have, and then we updated some of the things. So we will be doing that once an hour. Starting maybe at 3:30 or 4 o'clock. We haven't started as of yet. But Commissioner Rush will be in the booth. That's for it. That's going to be there, but we will be doing that. And we even made copies so that the people in the back who can't see the computer will have up there as a visual kind of aid that's going to be there. And in addition to that, Janelle Hardy, which I'm going to be making copies of, sent me coloring pages of the United Automotive Building with comments on the building, Henninger Park, Henninger House, that's going to be there. 2019 Historic Home Award for us to hand out, and 2018 Historic Preservation Award. So we're going to have a lot of handouts that's going to be there. And we're in the VIP section of the park. The city did that. And so we're very thankful that the city put us in a prominent position in that park. One of the other things that I wanted to...
You had some very influential help.
Thank you. If you haven't seen Preserve OC, their website, and you can see me afterwards, but I got an email for their newsletter that they're sending out, and I will give you the email address so that you can get these updates. And some of the things that they're doing, it says this newsletter, you'll see articles highlighting some of our activities and our strategies for confronting challenges, which includes defending modernism in Orange County, defending good public health, promoting preservation alternatives in new development, supporting financial incentive for historic property owners, events that spread the word about preservation, and changing Orange County's image. So those are some of the good image that I got, and I printed this out for them. One of the things that over in my area, we're having this transition house, 700 beds. And I know I've had it. Anyway, this Thursday coming up, the County of Orange, is he here someplace? But the County of Orange and the neighborhood surrounding the Yale House, now the Yale Transitional House, okay? Now that's where schools, Centennial Park, Heritage, Museum, all the businesses in there. We didn't even know about what was going there, that the county bought this building with the city's suggestion of putting this 700-bed transitional house in our neighborhood. So we are having a meeting at 5:30 at the Heritage Museum on Thursday. And I would love for you guys to come out and help support us in really protecting, you're talking about preservation and protecting, to help us to stop, this magnitude of homeless shelter in our area. Business owners didn't even know, they're upset at the same time. So please, mark your calendars for Thursday. Somebody please tell me the date of next Thursday.
24th.
24th, 5:30, Heritage Museum, to come in and talk about the this transitional area. Very, we rally around other neighborhoods, and this is the first time we're asking all the rest of the city to come down and help us in that quadrant of the city. And with that, once again, thank staff. October the 23rd, 5 p.m., 5 to 8.
The 23rd is a Wednesday then.
Wednesday,
Okay.
I said Thursday, right?
Yes.
Wednesday, knew I had this, Wednesday, October 23rd, 5 p.m. to 8 p.m., which is the County of Orange is sponsoring at the Heritage Museum. Okay, and that's at 3101 West Carter Street. Okay, right on there, so we do need to let your neighbors know. You need as many people out there as possible. And with that, I want to thank once again the staff, commissioners. I think we had a good discussion, right? Very
Great
good
discussion.
And for the members of the community coming in and helping us, and now giving us some direction, staff direction of what we can and cannot do, okay? Thank you once again, and I would like to adjourn this meeting at, I've got 6:40 p.m. to our next scheduled meeting, which will be Thursday, January 23rd, 2020 at 4:30.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.
Yeah, my stomach's growling.
Time to go eat.
Validation.